Americans no longer want the penny, and it's not just some of them, it's a staggering 58% of them, and if you reach the end of this video, that number is probably going to rise because you'll be one of them. You see, around 1792, the US Mint had introduced the 1-cent coin along with the quarter, dime, and half cent. The half cent was later discontinued, and the half dime is now what we know as a nickel. The penny, however, despite its essentially useless buying power, still remains. The penny is only worth 1 cent, yet it cost about 3 cents to produce. This is obviously a problem when what 58% of voters agree to be a waste of time, money, and resources. The other half of voters, excluding the ones that didn't answer the question, believe that abolishing the penny would lead to a disruption in business. This is not only untrue, but in fact the entirely opposite would occur. As CGP Grey said 12 years ago, the extra 2 seconds it takes for you and the cashier to fumble around with pennies is simply not worth your time or the people behind you's time. If you really want to spend your pennies without wasting other people's time, you could try finding a machine that'll accept them, but good luck with that. Vending machines, laundromats, parking meters, and virtually everything else won't accept them because they're literally not worth the time to process. Now let's say that America does get rid of the penny, what happens to the transactions that cost $2.41 or $2.43? The answer is actually quite simple. If you choose to pay with card, you'll only get charged the exact amount, and if you choose to pay with cash, the transaction will get rounded to the nearest 5-cent interval. So for example, if you're paying with cash and the transaction is $2.41, you'll only get charged $2.40. But if the transaction is $2.43, you'll get charged $2.45. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but as mentioned before, the 1 or 2 cent difference is simply not worth causing a fuss about. In fact, we can confidently say that in the world of economics, it wouldn't make a big difference at all. It wouldn't cause prices to rise or savings to decrease. New Zealand, Canada, and other penniless countries literally had no noticeable difference in either of those categories. Now, if somebody were to enter a store and choose to pay with pennies, they will always be regarded as the legal tender. However, instead of the store sending them back into circulation, they would send them back to the US Mint to be burned and repurposed. What is shocking, however, is that back in 1857, when the half-cent coin was discontinued due to its small buying power, it actually had the buying power of roughly 18 cents today, or 2 dimes. Another reason why the half-cent coin was discontinued was because the cost to make it exceeded its actual value, which is ironic because it costs roughly 3 cents to make a 1-cent coin now. And if you tend to get political, you might want to stop watching now because I'm about to put this into numbers. In 2022, the US spent about $173 million to only make about $63 million worth of pennies. Yikes. This means that they essentially made $110 million go poof. The good news is, however, the US Mint doesn't operate on taxpayers' money, but instead the money that they make from their own operations. The bad news is, however, that any profit that the US Mint does make goes back into federal programs. So in other words, if we didn't produce pennies that year, that would have been $173 million to put towards our education, our schools, our roads, but let's be honest, it probably would have gone to a war, which we already forgot what we're fighting for in the first place. And if that made you upset, you're probably going to hate what I tell you next. There's a concept in economics called opportunity cost, which basically states that if you're doing one thing, you could be doing another thing. And a little while ago, some very smart people calculated that the time and energy it takes for Americans to fumble around with pennies cost us nearly $1 billion each year. And that study was done well over a decade ago, so imagine what it is now. But let's not forget the actual reason for money, which is to pose as a medium of exchange for goods and services, pennies of which don't do this efficiently. We have our regular dollar bills because they're easily divisible into smaller pieces, and it's not until we start getting into fractions of the $1 bill that things start to get a little inefficient. Nickels, dimes, and quarters can stay for now because they're all easily divisible by 5, and in any cash transaction, you'll need less coins total compared to as if you were to bring pennies into the mix. For example, if your change is $2.40, it's very easy for the cashier to grab 1 quarter, 1 dime, and 1 nickel. However, if your change is $2.39, it suddenly becomes incredibly inefficient to grab 1 quarter, 1 dime, and 4 pennies. This extra time that is added to the transaction is literally a loss for every single party that is involved. The cashier is slower to give you your change, you now have to carry an extra 4 pennies around, and next time you go to use them, the entire cycle just continues. Pennies are simply just an emotional attachment that we have, and not at all a monetary one. The truth is that they're incredibly inefficient, they're too hard to spend, and have too little buying power for what they cost to produce. But wait until you hear that a single nickel costs 10 cents to produce. That, however, is a conversation for another time. I'll see you in a bit.